Well, good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is well and enjoying their Dhamma practice. We're winding down things here at the Hermitage, although it seems like winding up. And spoke a little bit about this on Tuesday, dealing with a bit of how to deal with sort of the hindrance of worry. And so last night, I think I was up till quite late, and we were doing all kinds of, myself and the other monks were actually working on the walking paths to the kutis till probably around 8 or 9 p.m. And preparing for the rain. So, a lot, things can kind of come up around that, it was getting into, actually I think it was after 9, starting to just, the light was starting to tint. And you think, what am I doing right now, working, and what's the need for this? But it was going to rain, so that's just the fact of the matter. We have to deal with conditions as they are. And so we tarped our walking paths because we'd been working on them for a while, power washing and sanding, and of course I noticed what comes up around this kind of these times, because what can come up, because we had been out all day. Actually, we'd been working on testing an antenna for the upcoming Papa, so we could live stream the event. And so one of our supporters has very generously offered to let us use his mobile, quote-unquote mobile antenna, so Starlink, thanks to Elon Musk. And so we spent, a few hours actually testing that out, working on it, taking it off of his house, supporter's house, and which wasn't very comfortable, being, perhaps about 30 to 40 feet up without a harness, just peering over the edge of the roof. But it was interesting to watch that, what is the experience of kind of just one slight wrong move, and that would be it. The body might not survive a 30, 35 foot, 40 foot fall. Anyway, so everything was successful. It was really nice, and there was sort of a feeling of happiness around, okay, it worked out. Looks like we can support the Papa event. This is a cloth offering ceremony that we do, or actually not that the monks do, but the lay people do, and it's similar to a katina, which is a cloth offering that's given to monks at the end of the rainy season, a sort of congratulatory or kind gift to say, well done, you stayed together for the Vasa. And because at the time of the Buddha, many of the monks were wandering and they didn't stay in one place. So although it's not our rainy season here in the U.S., we follow the rainy season according to the time of India, just because it'd be confusing since we're all supposed to settle down for a few months at that time, it'd be confusing if we were moving back and forth to different places, and some monks were following the Vasa in one part of the world and others were not. And since you're supposed to stay settled, the ones who are settled say, why are you doing this? So, well, it's not our rainy season. So we all tend in the world, as far as I know, most monks and nuns just follow the same rainy season, and that would be the summer for us here, July, August, September, and part of October. anyway, we are doing this for a papa, which we're doing in place of a katina, because you need, I believe it's four monks to have a katina. And normally at the Hermitage there's just 3, and this vasa there'll only be 2. So we successfully tried the satellite out, and it worked, and it looks like we're going to be able to live stream both days, meditation half day long, September 18th, and the papa September 19th. So back to that success, there was a feeling of happiness. It actually worked out, and it looks like we'll be able to do exactly what we wanted. Of course, as you all know, with technology, that doesn't always work. But you can see when, the monks had already been on alms round in the morning, and we were, it was good to be with this was our steward who we're with, a person who helps support us a little more closely and takes care of financial things or offers our tonics to us each week. So it was a nice event, a nice time together, but it's normally the time that we have quiet in the afternoon, and so the mind can kind of move into, all right, I'm doing this, and there can be a sense of sometimes discontent arising, or possibly a sense of I'd rather be doing something else. I noticed for myself, being the senior monk here, is that because I'm sometimes, not always, calling the shots, it doesn't feel the same as when I was a more junior monk at Abhayagiri, and there was another senior monk calling things. And it's interesting because normally you'd think oh, great, I don't have to really think about stuff, I just do what the senior monk says. But there can also arise a feeling of, with that somebody else is making decisions, that there's a sense of oppression, or something like having a boss. I try not to imbibe that attitude at all, but I can see in myself how when I'm making decisions and I'm the sort of senior person there, then I don't feel that at all, because I have complete freedom of in terms of well, let's do this or let's do that. Of course, as I mentioned, it doesn't really work out so straightforwardly like that. There are views and opinions, my own views and opinions, that we would deal with in a group, and also the others. In Westerners, I found, I don't want to say Westerners, just people in general, tend to express their opinions maybe a little bit more than what I've seen in the Thai monks I've met, or the training in Asia, where there can be a bit more of an easier going attitude with the senior monks. And I was no exception to this as I was training, and still am no exception to this, that you feel well, I want to have my say or my view or my particular idea of how this should work being expressed, and it can be very hard to let go of that. So as the day wore on, and then we had other tasks to do after this, we got into an interesting situation at a hardware store, the name of which I won't mention, and I became really frustrated. And I think it was that the day was longer, and I think we were all feeling it. But we were just trying to get some paint, some stain actually, for the work we were doing. And the first person I encountered was, I'm not sure if it was just the time of day or what was going on with him, but he was immediately had a sense of impatience dealing with us within a few seconds. Or maybe 30 seconds or something. I could say, this fellow seems to not be wanting to wait very long, or to take his time with us, or maybe even care to take time with us to explain things and go through it. So I find it interesting in those situations, because practicing with the Dhamma, we might immediately feel a sense of needing to fight. That can come up in the body, but with the Dhamma, then there's a sense of, okay, how can I harmonize with the situation? how can I be content with this, to dealing with somebody who isn't very easy to deal with. So this worker in the hardware store was willing to kind of help point things out, but because we weren't quite sure, and I wasn't quite sure about the decision being made. He eventually left in the middle of our conversation. So we found someone else who was helpful, and I'm happy to say both of them were, at least in their own way, were trying to help. But then the next person had more of a sense of not being sure about what could be done or what was useful. And in my own mind, what was coming up for me was just a frustration over decision making and not having exactly the information and not feeling like an expert, not really knowing what I should choose, what's the best to choose. And I've consulted Ajahn Siddhanto, Ajahn Karunadhammo, both who are, who actually know these things better than I. And I did my own research, and it was kind of all over the map. And then I consulted some of our supporters here who had ideas, some of whom are woodworkers, and two woodworkers who are good friends, and they had very different opinions. And in the end, it's just, I think in a difficult moment, when I was talking with one of the monks, I said, it just doesn't, in the end, it really doesn't matter. You go ahead with a decision, and it either becomes a decision you regret and you live with, or you regret and you have to change, or it just is sort of good enough. There's so much worry and that can happen over a decision. Am I going to make the right one? Is it going to work out? That, it can be sort of difficult to move forward or paralyzing. I wouldn't say there was a feeling of paralysis, but there was a frustration with, even at this point, with all of the research and the workers here and the people I've consulted, there's just no clear answer. When we went forward and decided on what to buy, a particular color was added, and just kind of looking at that, one of the monks immediately said, "That's not going to work. That color's really not what we wanted." And admittedly, it didn't look too great. Supposed to be a chocolate brown, similar to the kuti. And so the mind reacts like, okay, again, failure, difficulty. So one of the other monks is just, well, let's put it on this other kuti where it might be better because the wood isn't as nice, and it'd be better to cover the wood that isn't as high quality with something that we're not as satisfied with. And I just noticed in myself this resistance. No, we haven't finished sanding that one yet. Anyway, these views that we deal with, they can really they can cause a lot of delusion, aversion, especially. My view is right, and or with delusion, confusion. Which view do I trust? And I think the problem is often locating the experience outside of the body in some rationale. Like, I'm going to figure this out with thought. Whereas our problems really, the problems that we try to figure out with thought are really worldly problems. They're not problems that we are going to resolve in a way, or the dukkha, I will say, is not going to be resolved through practicality and through resolving things as like getting a right product or a right color or whatever it might be. It's just here in the heart. And that's what we, for myself, what I can, for example, confuse sometimes is like, well, I'll figure out the situation if I get my view straightened out about it, if I have the right, or I'm attached to this particular view. I have this particular view. Of course, I don't see the attachment, but and my view will be correct, and I have to get the right view about this. And then there can be a resistance to other people. So this morning, or even just thinking about in the talk, disregarding what was said about, just for example, what the other monk said about, let's use it on this other text. Oh yeah, okay, we could do that. But at first it was just like, no way. And I'm bringing this up as more of maybe an encouragement to look at how the views that we express in our lives, whether it's private or in public, how they can, they can really create a lot of delusion and confusion in our experience. And if we're not clarified in our hearts and our minds, and understanding how dukkha is arising from having views, then we sort of will continue along with that thread, and it's not a thread we really want to follow. It's essentially not the Dhamma. Now that doesn't mean that we don't have views, but there needs to be a flexibility around, well, this is a particular view I might want to take, a particular opinion, an idea, something that I think is what I want to follow. But if it's not the case, if there's something that arises in my experience, such as another person's opinion or just my seeing that it's wrong, then I find it can be often difficult to reverse course. And then we get into all kinds of psychological things around, like not wanting to look like we're flip-floppy, or or we can't make our mind up. So there is a flexibility that's required, but I think that flexibility is guided by our own citta, it's guided by our own hearts and minds. So if we're able to penetrate the Dhamma and understand the Dhamma when we're dealing with our views and opinions, then we really have the potential to not being pushed around by them so much. There can be more of an equanimity around how we hold our various opinions. And so I remember an example one time where the Dalai Lama, I was told a story about how he was giving a Dhamma talk, and he had his translator there, and the translators he works with tend to be fairly well known to him. He can travel around with the same translator, I think, for years, because I've seen similar translators with him. Anyway, the translator is translating into English what he was talking about, and all of a sudden he said, no, that's not right. That's not what I said. And so then they start kind of going back and forth, and he's saying, no, that's not it, and this is what I said. And so at the end, after just a minute or two of this dialogue back and forth about what was said and what wasn't said and what's the correct translation, and the translator was sort of insisting, well, this is what you actually said. And then the Dalai Lama, after a minute or two, just, oh yeah, it is. Okay. And then he just moved on. And it was, I think for the people who saw it, it was quite an important lesson, because here this person was, this very important person whose people regard his opinion very highly, and also how he behaves, and also him as a knowledge base. So he's supposed to be sort of in the know about things. And the irony is that his just completely letting go and realizing that he had indeed made a mistake, and that the translator hadn't. The translator had translated correctly. That was much more a Dhamma lesson for people than possibly anything that was spoken about. But just to see how such a great being was just able to have that potential to let go, so easily and quickly, and in front of thousands of people. So I think we can take a sort of a page from the Dalai Lama's book, a page from his the way he does things, and try to really bring that in for ourselves. Ask ourselves, how can I bring up that sense of like non-attachment to my own thoughts and my own opinions? And again, this is not creating some sort of ideal where we don't have opinions, because we know that can be quite difficult for people when they ask us, do you want lunch? I don't know. I'm trying not to have an opinion about it. That's not so helpful. There needs to be a practicality. Or if somebody really does want to know your preference, for example, and one's not a monk or whatever, and they're asking you, what would you prefer? Then they want to know. They're asking you. So, and the reason I'd said that if one's not a monk is ideally one say, well, it's okay. I'm happy with whatever I have, whatever I'm receiving. But I think that in a sense, there are some views that we have, but it's actually the attachment we have to be very careful of. It's some of our views are so innocuous they don't really matter so much, but then when somebody challenges us on them, then we really see that tenacity that we hold on to them. I'm right, and there can be a sense of righteousness. So that's where I think we want to really be careful about that. How much are we holding or fixing to our views, and how can we let go of that? So one of the ways that I find helpful to let go of that is when I do feel a lot of aversion, when someone disagrees with my view, or if I'm wrong about something, is just to try to really be like, okay, I might not feel okay, but that there's a sense of like, all right, can I let go of this? Can I allow this other person to have their view? And hopefully, yes, because that's how harmony works. Like, we don't want to be tyrannical and just tell people my view is correct and nobody else's view is allowed here. So even as a senior monk, as I was mentioning before, I have to deal with that a lot. And sometimes I'm attached, and sometimes it's, I do want to stick with a particular view, and sometimes I'm not attached, but I still stick with the view, because they know a decision needs to be made, and I just think this is the wiser decision. But other times, just dealing with that sense of challenge that can come up. It's hard to work with when I'm identifying with what I think is right, or what my particular opinion that I think is right. Then there's a lot of pain in that. There can be a lot of kind of, especially in a sense of admitting that I'm wrong, or being wrong by allowing somebody else's view. That's very painful. That identification that like something's wrong with me if somebody has a different view or opinion, or if I allow, I just kind of say, okay, I'm okay with backing down on my opinion. And that's very important to pay attention to, because the more that we just follow our own views and opinions and sort of ignore others, and also at the same time have an attitude that if I ever need to apologize or say that I'm wrong, or if there's no room or any space for us to really back down from our views and opinions, or to change our minds, then we're really in trouble. And this is why the Buddha actually attributes views to, so he talks about views as being such a strong hindrance on our path if we're clinging to them. And especially he talks about the particular wrong views that we can take with our spiritual life. Like, for example, a view that it doesn't matter what we do. It's not going to have any effect on us in this life, or even if we don't believe in another life, it won't have any effect. That's a view, he says, that actually can cause immense dukkha for one. Because you could imagine you can just go through life just harming as many people as you want. It doesn't matter to you. So it's not only the letting go of views, but it is also sometimes particularly the views we have. I'd encourage a practice with this, just in terms of most of us who have some experience with practicing Dhamma know that what we're doing is we're paying attention. So the two ways I think one can pay attention to this is, again, in the private and the public sphere. So we often have self-talk. So what is it that we're holding to in our views around our self-talk? A lot of things I've brought up is our particular views of ourselves, how we think we're wrong, or it doesn't work, or it's not helpful, what we're doing, or we say things to ourselves that are discouraging and unhelpful, and I think it's good to challenge our own views of these. I'm a terrible meditator. I don't know what I'm doing. After all these years, what have I gained? Well, what have you gained? What were you trying to gain? That might be the problem in the first place. But yeah, to kind of challenge that, is that really true? And to question that. So I don't think it's just a public sense of our particular views and opinions. Even how we think about others when we're alone. That's important to look at. We often will get into sort of, when we're alone, a sort of righteousness we can have if we're recalling a difficulty we've had with somebody, and to really question that. I mean, the person often who we feel righteous with, like in terms of our being right and they're wrong, is they feel the same way. So you can at least have compassion for that, or possibly they feel the same way. That if you're feeling this adamant about something and they possibly are, then you know what that's like, and it's not very pleasant. And so we try to have a compassion for the other person, but also questioning how do we know that we're right and they're absolutely wrong? When we're with people and we have to deal with people, like as I was explaining in the store, I think it's important, or just the people I was dealing with in my example around the work we were doing, we do need to be open, and there can be a feeling of pressure. There was like 3 other people trying to, just deal with my decision making, and in the moment I wasn't very comfortable with making a decision. So we need to kind of be careful around the stress that can come of that, and be very careful around how we're handling our expression of our opinions and ideas with others. And so again, that's kind of coming back to the Dhamma and our noticing what's actually happening in our minds. And when we do see that, we say, oh, there's some suffering here, or there's some clinging. And I may not be able to let go of the clinging and suffering, but I can know it. And then from knowing it, I can act and say, okay, this might not be wise to move in this particular direction. So yeah, try to think about these things over your next lifetime, and I think that's good for now. There were some questions last week as well I didn't answer, but I didn't have time this morning. I apologize, to go back to the last live stream and look them up. So if anybody wants to ask any of those, you can, or if there's anything that came up about some questions you might have around how you deal with your own views and opinions and clinging to them, letting them go. Or if you're just opinionless right now, then that's good. That's okay too. Well, there's nothing yet. I'll keep pausing here, but before that, I wanted to let you know something that is good news, and I'll probably give a talk next Friday, if all is well, and I'm still around. I'm planning to be. And then after that, I think that's the 26th, I believe. I could be wrong. for the Friday after next, and that Lumpur will be here at that time. And so the good news is that Lumpur, and possibly occasionally, but probably mostly Lumpur Pasano, my teacher, and the monk who will be living here, as well as Ajahn Kurundama will be living here. Lumpur Pasano, for anybody who doesn't know him, has been a monk almost 50 years. I think it's just a couple of years shy of that. Or this is his 48th year as a bhikkhu. He will be here for the whole, as I was mentioning, the Vasa, this non-rainy season, although it's raining today. He'll be here for the whole Vasa, and he'll be giving talks on Friday mornings. So wanted to just pass that good news on. Ajahn Kurundama may also give talks. They won't be giving talks together, though. At least that wasn't the plan. And so Lumpur will give the talks on Tuesday evenings at Yoga Samadhi, and also he will be giving talks here on Friday mornings, if all goes according to plan. So we do have some questions here. I'm sorry, just the last thing to follow up is that won't be next Friday, but the Friday after next is an unknown. I asked, but since we do deal with the unknown in our practice, that's what Ajahn Kurundama and Lumpur left me, that we'll see what happens. They'll be here, but it'll be just less than a day and a half that they have arrived, so I'm not sure they're going to, either one of them is going to want to jump into the live stream, but I was trying to cook up a possible interview, so we'll see if I can manage that. Like possibly I could just run the technical stuff and ask a couple of questions. So speaking of questions, there is something here. Marilyn is asking about how about being attached to the precepts, and very good question. That's particularly a question about Silabhata Paramasa, and that would be attachment to, one translation is rites and rituals, another is like practices and precepts. So one of the ways that we can be attached to precepts is taking a particular view about them, that if we just don't do certain things, then we will get results. And that view might be technically correct in certain terms, but we can attach to it and think we don't have to actually practice with what it is we're refraining from in order to understand the Dhamma. So we might think, if I, in a sort of automatic way, like, like if I don't kill any ants or creatures, any living creatures, or this mosquito that's bothering me, then I'll find at the end of my life I'll go to heaven, or I'll be reborn in a heavenly realm, or I will I'll realize the fruit of one of the fruits of enlightenment. It's always good not to kill things, so that's what the precept is, right? Don't kill any living being. But if we're coming at it from an automatic way, then we're just seeing that, like, oh, okay, I'm not actually reflecting on, like, oh, how do we think about killing? We think about, well, I don't want to be killed. I don't want my life ended. So we can extend that to another creature, another being. And we can see how other people don't have a sense of another being suffering, how they might not be really understanding in the Dhamma that sense of looking within. When we have, for example, a sense of another being suffering, then we don't want to harm another living being. We kind of, that's where Hiriyottapa comes in. It's like, why would I want to do that? And we shrink back. We shrink back from that, rather than it being a rote just rule. So in that way, we could just attach to it. I'm going to not do this thing, but we don't reflect on it. And we can do that with all kinds of rules, and especially the rules that monastics follow, monks and nuns follow. you can follow a lot of these rules and not really think about them and just think I'm just going to do them, and hopefully it has has an effect. So I think it's important to, as Marilyn is talking about, like we can attach to those particular precepts or view them in a way and not be really cognizant of how it is that we're actually taking them up as a useful guide to our behavior, so we don't get into unskillful behaviors and then we don't really cause a lot of dukkha for ourselves. Then there's the attachment to the rule in terms of like seeing how we can practice them to an appropriate degree, which doesn't mean we break rules, but we learn to apply them in the right way. So, for example, one that comes up with monastics is that we have to receive the food into our hands for it to be offered. This is the bhikkhu and bhikkhuni rules. You can't just be told, somebody says, oh, there's a plate on the table over there, I set down for you. And other monastics can practice that way, but in terms of the Buddha's rules around bhikkhunis and bhikkhus, we need to actually have it. Someone needs to put it in our hand, and that's because it makes it very clear that something is given. And there's not kind of a question about it. Well, there's also one of the ways that we practice with this, but it's not actually exactly how the rule states, is that if anybody kind of takes that thing back or moves the object, takes it back, possibly they have an intention to take it themselves, we consider, well, it's unoffered, it's not ours anymore. Technically, by the Buddha's rules, that's not, as I understand it, how it works. As long as we have possession of something that we've been given in our mind, so, okay, I've received this food, it's been given to me, and somebody has taken it, I can say to them, that's actually mine. And there's a funny story, not funny, but it's an interesting story around a novice monk who's not ordained, so doesn't have the same category as a bhikkhu or bhikkhuni. And if we're just having them take some of our food from our bowl, for example, like, okay, I've gone on alms round and this novice hasn't, so I'm sharing the food. And then if he starts taking more than what we wanted to give, or maybe more than we think he needs, or whatever it might be, a large amount, we can just tell him, nope, put that back. We can say, please put that back in the bowl, or some of that back in my bowl. And it's still offered. We don't have to receive it. We don't have to be having it put in our hands. We're still in possession. So in the same way, not to get too much into details, but a monk or a nun might feel like trepidation around our particular training, that the training is that if somebody touches it or takes it, that we kind of relinquish it. If they take it away and they say, this is mine, and so even though it was ours, they take it, we would actually say, okay, I'm not going to, that's not mine anymore. I'm not going to get into an argument here. But the attachment to that can be that even if somebody kind of like nudges the food, or maybe they weren't even intending to touch it, they just kind of moved it slightly, there can be an apprehension sometimes, and that can be that attachment to that rule. It's like, oh, you have to offer this again. Your body bumped it. And there can be a lot of tension around that. So I think for us as monastics, I've learned over time, it's just good to kind of try to figure out how to apply the rules, and to see, like, there's sometimes when it's just not appropriate to be so clingy about them in terms of something like that, where I know the rule. The rule is that something like that is still mine, whether or not somebody touches it, and especially if I see that they weren't intending to take it themselves. There's no question. I can just say it's still offered, and so that has a usefulness. Whereas I've seen others can get quite worried about it, especially when monks are just starting to train. They think, oh my gosh, this food is on offer, and now other monks are going to eat it, other nuns are going to eat it. What am I going to do? I'm causing an offense for all these people, and then all the worrying comes in. So that's where we have to be careful about being attached to the particular precepts we have. But I would say that please don't interpret that as when we're in an inconvenient situation, we can throw out the precepts. In that mind state, you want to be attached to the precepts, so you do actually want to attach to them. You do want to keep them close. And as Ajahn Chah said, with our tendency to sometimes do that, to go out the easy way with things, the way to be careful, as Ajahn Chah mentioned, was the Vinaya, our rules that we follow, is what we get attached to, what we can attach to, right? And it's the Dhamma that we want to learn to let go. That's what we want to use to let go. So he was saying that to a certain extent you do have to be careful with your attachment to rules, but you don't want to also be careless with that, with those rules. And so in a way, I think he was using that attachment or clinging to the rules as opposed to what the Dhamma is teaching us in terms of letting go and non-attachment. He was saying we want to kind of think about our rules as something we're not like allowing them to kind of drift off or stray far from. So we want to keep them close. Okay, so shall I ask, sometimes I wonder if my conditioning says I'm wrong in my views. What should I do? I'd need a little bit more explanation of that. I suppose that that would mean that the particular things that you take or your own personality and who you are and how you are, how you're brought up, suggests that what you're doing is the view you particularly have is wrong. And I think we just need to investigate just again that attachment and how it is we're really clinging to what we think is right or what we think is wrong. And it's that clinging itself that is going to inform us about whether we're doing something in a skillful way. Because it's not that our views are necessarily wrong. It's that the sense that we are attaching to them, do or die, we're not making room for any other possibility. And it's that clinging element to them, not even just in the other possibility, but the sense of identifying with them and believing in them, holding them, that is causing the problem, not whether the view is necessarily right or wrong. So, for example, if we're to think of our view around karma, I think my view around karma is correct. Well, it might be that we have a correct view around, as I'm talking about karma, just to explain, that would be that our actions have results. That if we do something that is harmful, that will have a result in the world, and that will have a result for us. And mostly it's a view of seeing that these things come back to us when we do good deeds. It's never clear about how or why. That's hard to exactly be clear of. But if I'm to kind of cling to that view, I can feel very righteous about it. And so if others don't believe that, I can think they're wrong, and I'm angry with them. So that would be that's what's informing us that the particular take we have on the views that we have is not coming from the right place. Because when you know something to be true, you don't need to defend it or defend yourself around it or feel righteous or angry about it, because you know it to be true for yourself. That's when, I think, with the Buddha's teachings, we gain faith, or sattha, which is a sense of confidence about what it is that we understand and know. When we have that, it doesn't really matter what other people think, and we don't feel necessarily clinging, because it's a part of us. It's what we know to be true. So whether or not somebody accepts it or not, it doesn't matter. It's not. It's of no importance to us, because we we see it clearly for ourselves, and we don't need anybody else to believe it or express that they understand it. I think that's a little bit similar to how the Buddha, when he first understood the Dhamma, penetrated the Dhamma, and was enlightened, he wasn't so inclined to teach. He was like, well, I know this to be true. I don't know if anybody else would actually, if I could show anybody else the way, it might be just impossible. So he wasn't so sure whether that was possible, but he knew it for himself to be true. So he didn't have to go out and tell anybody. So from Mary, there's a question of opinion often seems to be rooted in perceptions, and the perception is so habit-based. How to approach or even see the perception that underlies the opinion? Oh, that's a very good question. So, a couple of ways to think about perception is in the Buddha's context, which is that we take in or we experience the content of our minds or whatever it is that we're contacted by through understanding, and it has something to do with memory. So perception has to do with a recollection of something. So as I'm looking at you, I'm actually looking through a camera. I'm not seeing you. So my perception, I might be imagining people here, but when I'm looking at this thing, I recognize it as a camera, as a video camera. And so how perception works is that we're kind of informed by our past to see, or particularly to understand whatever it is we're seeing, to know this thing is that. But another way that people often talk about perceptions is the way they take an understanding of what it is they see. So seeing in a particular way, or like, for example, somebody who sees race, or who might have strong feelings about race, they've actually created a perception about that based on somebody's skin color. And there can be other people who have no concept of that. So, for example, someone who lives in a country where everyone does have a similar complexion, or it's not the same, of course, but similar. They just might have no idea how a similar kind of racism could work as what is seen in, for example, in America, where people really do have complete pictures in their heads about who people are based on what they're actually seeing in their skin complexion, or the particular look they have on their face, or whatever it might be, that they think is similar to another person. And so that's an excellent example of how we think of that type of perception, because as most of us know, race is created. You're not, there isn't people aren't walking around with signs of I'm part of this particular race, because it's just a view that we've taken over time, and that perception has created a belief in our experience. These people who have darker skin are called this, or are like this, and we can reinforce that. We can actually create that perception in our own mind. We can see that when that opinion of particular people who look a certain way, when we see somebody act the way that we think that group acts, then it's right, I'm right again. But we're blocking out the fact that we're not right, that people act in all kinds of different ways, and it's not attributed to a group. We're just actually doing that attribution ourselves. And so this sense of being rooted in perceptions as is habit-based is exactly that. Like, we create, as I'm talking about this perception of race, there is no actual thing called race. It's just, and I'm probably preaching to the choir here, as I think most people know that. There's different skin pigments or different ways that people look. And sometimes that can be similar based on locale. Like somebody being from a particular country. But that has nothing to do with the person. Right? It just happens to be they were born in a particular place. Or more, not necessarily place, I would say, with a particular set of genes. But even that is our own information about that perception is often completely misguided, because we're attributing what we think looks similar as meaning something for us, as factual. And it's just not. We can't really guess or understand too much based on how somebody looks. Even how somebody is dressed can misinform us. We can think, oh, that person's really wealthy, look at all the clothes they're wearing, or they're very poor. It's not always the case that we clearly understand our perceptions. So in terms of how to approach this, it's just, I think it's important to just kind of question our habits and try to undermine them. And try not to how do you undermine, for example, racism is you try to see people always, the person underneath a possible automatic perception that we have of the person based on their look. And then we get that it might be so deep that we have a hard time recognizing that, or perceiving the habits we take in that case that I'm speaking about. But it's possible that through really trying to work with just getting to know human beings that we have particular opinions about or views of, and in this case, how they look, we break up that perception, our belief of who and what they are. And so I think I'm giving a more gross explanation of a perception, whereas it can be more subtle. And then particularly how we take our views and opinions of others. I think we just need to try to challenge those and do our best to challenge them. And the way that we do that is just questioning, like, is that true? Do I know that to be true? Is that permanent? The Buddha teaches about non-permanence. And Ajahn Chah translated that as maineya. Anicca was more of a sense of don't know, not sure. And so we want to bring that up with ourselves as much as possible. Our not being sure about certain things. I know he's like that. I know she's like that. I know what he's thinking. Anytime you unless you can actually read a mind, then any kind of sense that we know what somebody else is thinking is usually wrong. Even if we kind of guess it correctly, we're not in their mind. We can't know that, even if we have a sense of what it is that's going through their mind, that we would take it in the same way as they are taking it. They might be experiencing that particular thought in a very different way. So I think we have to be very careful about how we assume, and we want to always try to never make assumptions. But that's what we do as humans. We're trying to guess things. That's our sort of typical way of operating in the world, but we want to do it without being very attached to what it is we're guessing at. Because in a lot of ways we don't know necessarily how to proceed, what stain to buy, and we got to make particular guesses as to how we're going to proceed, how we're going to go forward in terms of making decisions. And so we don't always know. But as long as we know we don't know, not to channel Donald Rumsfeld, but the important fact is to be aware of that in ourselves, and how we might want to cling to that knowing, or these habits that we have, the particular biases that we have, and see them very clearly for ourselves. So I think I'm running a bit over right now, and it's almost 8 o'clock. So I just wanted to wish you all well. For those of you who will watch on Tuesday, tune into the live stream on Tuesday. See you then. Or in person at Yoga Samadhi. And then next Friday morning at 7, I should be here. All goes according to plan. And we'll see if there's another live stream with me after that. But either way, hopefully you will see some Dhamma. Take care, have a good week, and use your practice in this way to inform yourselves around how taking up of views and opinions can cause suffering, and how also to watch and see that there's less suffering when we stop clinging to these views and opinions. Okay.